IVM.
The legal age for marriage in India is 21 for men and 18 for women. This gender disparity is baked into the law, but gender discrimination, distinctly different rules and norms for boys and girls, men and women, is entrenched far more perversely in Indian society. Growing up a boy in many parts of India can be quite challenging in and of itself, but it's infinitely worse growing up a girl in this country. In Jharkhand in 2015, for example, 38% of women aged 15 to 24 were married before the age of 18, and just about half the boys and girls aged 18 to 19 had completed class 10 in high school. This situation is not in any way unique to Jharkhand. Alongside this, fewer women have been participating in the Indian labour force, even as the Indian economy has been rapidly growing. Female labour force participation in India, for example, has fallen to about 23% in 2018, from a very weak high of 32% in 2005. So are women's lives in India even getting better at all? Trying to understand the challenges faced by adolescents in India is perhaps one lens to disentangle the wicked problems faced by Indian women. Shireen Jejebhoy, Manisha, Gupte and Richa Patel joined me on the Pragati Podcast to help with just that. Welcome to the Pragati Podcast, a weekly talk show on public policy, economics and international relations. I'm your host, Pavan Srinath. Shireen Jejebhoy is a demographer and a social scientist whose work has focused on young people's health and development. She's worked at the Population Council in India, the WHO in Geneva, and several other places. She's also conducted an expansive survey in Jharkhand for Dasra's Ab Meri Baari campaign. Manisha Gupte has been a part of women's and health rights movements in India since the mid-1970s. She studied microbiology before diving into sociology and co-founded Masoom in 1987, a rural women's organization. Richa Patel is a communications specialist and a team lead at Dasra, who's also instrumental in making this and the previous episode possible. My thanks to Dasra for helping me record this episode in Mumbai. Dasra is a philanthropic organization that helps facilitate social change by driving collaborative action between funders, development organizations and communities. Dasra has brought together a group of organizations to run the Ab Meri Baari campaign, which aims to improve the lives of adolescent girls between the ages of 10 to 19 and empower them in various ways. As a part of the campaign, 300 girl champions were selected across Jharkhand and Rajasthan to conduct a comprehensive social audit of all the government services that have been directed towards them. To learn more about the campaign, visit abmeribari.com. We'll start our discussion after a short break.
Hey everybody, welcome to another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please make sure you do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Also want to remind you, please do fill out our listener survey. This is a really, really important thing for us right now. You can go to ivmpodcast.com/survey. We ask you a few questions about who you are, what kind of podcast you like listening to, what do you think of things going on so far. So please do fill that out. It would help us. Also would like to thank our sponsors on the network this week. We have Intel, Cambly, and Storytel. This week on Cyrus Says, Cyrus is joined by writer Daksh Tyagi. Daksh talks about his debut book, A Nation of Idiots. He discusses what goes into writing satire, which is critical of the people and governments in power, and what are the legal hassles in doing so. On the Filter Coffee podcast, Karthik is joined by brand builder and author Siddharth Banerjee and corporate mythologist and author Eka Chaturvedi Banerjee. Together, they talk about the art of hyperlearning and discuss their journey on setting up 52 Red Pills. On Edges and Sledges, Varun, Ashwin and DJ talk about India's T20 series win over the West Indies and the first ODI in Chennai. On The Habit Coach, Ashton talks about motivation, grit, self-discipline and about finding purpose in the everyday things that you do. On Tapri Tales, Madhuri narrates a story titled Reshma's Purse. Tune in to hear the backstories of the little things that reside inside a woman's purse. On Storytellers and Storysellers, Vineet is joined by actor Amol Parashar and content strategist at TVF, Akansh Gaur. They talk about the risks and rewards they encountered after quitting their traditional jobs for digital media entertainment. And with that, let's get you on with your show.
Hi and welcome to the Pragati Podcast. I'm Pavan Srinath and I'm here recording this episode in Mumbai instead of Bangalore. And I'm here with Manisha, Shireen and Richa. Welcome all of you to the Pragati Podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We had an earlier conversation on the Ab Meri Baari campaign and about the challenges faced by adolescents in India in general. And if I'm not mistaken, adolescents, maybe between the ages of 10 and 19 or so, make up almost a fourth of India's population, or at least a fifth.
Yes,
And this is a huge population, and I feel like we are still in a vacuum when we're talking about many things relating to adolescents in the country. At least when we look at, say, social sector policy or something, there has been some evolution of how to think about maternal health. There's ideas of family planning at one time which are being revised. We know that infant mortality is a problem we need to tackle. But I feel like in the public discourse and perhaps even in government policy, the moment somebody enters their teens, nobody knows what to do with them beyond, send them to school, get them to crack an entrance exam and get into college. So first, I wanted to start with asking both of you, what are the challenges faced by men and women in this critical age period? I mean, we've talked previously about, the challenges of puberty and other things, but what else do you see happening in this space?
I think we tend to look at adolescence from a very unidimensional perspective. Adolescents have many needs, be it education, be it preparation for employability, gender relations, entering into sexual life, marrying, all those things. And I feel that today, with the demographic dividend emphasizing so much on the young, there's a recognition that we've really let down this population. We haven't addressed these multiple needs of the young.
So in that sense, while again, now there have been quite a few studies on how the first few years, the kind of nutrition that you get, the kind of care that you get, has a significant effect on your physical well-being later, your mental health later, and everything. This 10 to 19 period is critical for our development in all aspects, right? And so, while that is a personal development, while that's a development that happens within family, how do we, as people thinking about public policy or the government, really, how should we be looking at this?
See, I would take the point that Shireen made just now. I would take that further. So adolescents are not a homogeneous group. Right? So everybody between, say, 10 to 18, 10 to 19 don't have the same needs because they're not located in the same social, economic, political space. And so therefore they're divided on the basis of poverty, class, on the basis of caste, on the basis of whether they're urban or rural. So I'm a rural person in terms of my work. And so sometimes I say that, whether a girl is a girl or a woman doesn't depend on her age, but it depends on whether her address is urban or it's rural. Okay. So the same girl in the city would be a girl, and the same person in a village, in my village, would be a woman. They're also separated on the basis of their sexual orientation, on their gender identity, on whether they are the third girl in the household, whether they are the child of a second wife. So all these different things make adolescents vulnerable, not only in one area, but in different areas. And so therefore, no one government or state policy that is there for adolescents can reach out unless we understand that there are some people who are more vulnerable, who have more specific needs, and so therefore require more specific rights. Now, just take marital status. There's a whole bunch of adolescents that falls between two stools because you're not supposed to be married until 18, but you are married before 18. So then therefore what happens in government schemes? What happens when she wants to access an abortion? What happens when there's antenatal care? So all these different things, the policies which actually should be empowering the subjects that they are meant for, often implemented in ways because they hadn't thought out very well while they were being planned, they in fact actually disempower the subject, and that person at the most becomes an object of the delivery of schemes as a recipient or somebody who's turned back from the access of those schemes. So I would first place that adolescent not in a vacuum, but the fact that they are very, very much divided, even if they may belong to the same age group. So in my village, for example, a girl would be sterilized when she's 21. when somebody in the city is not even thinking probably of getting her married, just to give an example.
As in, she might have already had so many kids that...
She would be married at 17, had her 2 children. If the older one is a boy, then she's sterilized during the second birth. If the first one is a girl and the second one is a boy, then they might wait until the boy is about 2 or 3 years old. But if the first one is a boy, then her tubectomy is written on the cards.
Wow. Because the purpose has been served. So in that sense, it almost feels like this age period, and I know that this varies across communities and geographies, but there is a commodification of people, especially women in the country. Would that be a fair statement to make? That one, we don't give people the idea of individual liberties. We don't necessarily treat them as adults or even functioning individuals. They're either the property of their family in a sense or property of somebody else. So even if there is no human trafficking involved or anything else, is this a part of the Indian social reality?
The Indian social reality is a very patriarchal one. And as such, from pre-birth, we know that girls are discriminated against. Among adolescents, how does that discrimination reveal itself? I would say today in education, the gap is really narrowing, which is good news. But in other areas, child marriage, for example, while there's been a huge decline in child marriage over the last decade, it's still almost 3 in 10 girls marry below the age of 18 in this country. And that is definitely something to worry about. Although everyone's going to school, and there I would say boys and girls are equally disadvantaged. Attendance is not 100%. So attendance may be 60% or something. You look at other dimensions. You look at the school to work transition among the young. There's a concept called NEET, which is not in education, employment or training.
Right.
And you see that among boys, this is just about 8%. Among girls, it's something like 40-something%.
Wow.
So economic activity, aspirations for a career, all those things are denied to girls in this very patriarchal setting. Marital decisions, the decision on when and whom to marry, is equally denied to her. It's also denied to many boys. But for girls, you can imagine 60% or so, at least in Jharkhand, where we did the Dasra survey, 60% or so met their husband for the first time at the wedding.
Wow.
I don't need to describe what first sexual relations must be in that kind of a circumstance. So these gender differences are so overriding and so permeate every aspect of a girl's life. And of course, making decisions and so on after marriage, having mobility even before marriage. But married girls, if they marry in childhood, are particularly disadvantaged. They are the ones who have the least mobility. They are the ones who have the worst learning outcomes. They have the ones who are least likely to make decisions. They have no say over their own life. Girls in general, married girls even more so.
So if I may add, just in terms of an example that stands out of what Shireen and Manisha are speaking about, when we were going on the bus journey and when we were doing the social audit with the girls, we could see a stark, variation from district to district. Like in Simdega, which is a district in Jharkhand, a lot of girls are actually used to going and accessing sports facilities because hockey is played very widely over there. Okay. So like a lot of the girls had aspirations of being sports players. Versus in Rajasthan, when we went there, a lot of them were teenage brides. So they had very different needs from the campaign, and their focus was very different. So they were more focused on negotiations in their home about dealing their age of marriage or pregnancy. So like what Shireen and Manisha are saying, it's very different across the spectrum and what experiences they've had across the board.
Thank you. And I want to explore various aspects of this, from education to health and other things. I want to start with a bigger thing about, if you're talking about India's development and India's development story, and the two can be very different at times. We just hear on and off that, female education is extremely important in achieving this development and so on. But could you actually contextualize that, the relationship between how women are treated in any society and like the kind of opportunities they're given, and what we have seen in India, both with large-scale data and smaller examples, between development and people escaping poverty, getting to the middle class or so?
So I think it's a generational thing. So even among young adolescents, those who are 10 to 14, if you ask them, what are your educational aspirations? What are your career aspirations? I would say half of them don't have any. And this in itself, I think, is a terribly disturbing aspect of adolescent life. They have no thoughts about the future because they know that their futures are so constrained. Beyond that, even among the educated, those who complete at least a secondary school education, there are huge constraints to joining a skilling program or having a career. There are problems with mobility, being allowed to go out alone. You mentioned safety earlier, issues of perceived safety. There are a number of constraints that there are a few interventions that have been very successful in helping girls to make that transition into work, helping girls with the soft skills that they need to get a job, helping them to negotiate at family level. And there we found that in villages from where these girls come, there is a tendency for more girls to work, for more younger girls to have career aspirations, and even in some villages, not very robust data, but it suggests that even family size was reduced as a result. People have new thoughts, there are new alternatives.
So here, is it that can you only see genuine sort of regional development where, there is more prosperity among more households and more prosperity in general in households only if you see women in more empowered roles, either within the household or being someone who's also earning income? Have you seen that at micro and macro levels?
It's a loaded question.
No, because
at various levels. No, I think what you actually, it's good because it's a loaded question.
One of the things, not narratives per se, one of the things people talk about endlessly is, look, I mean, if there's someone in a village and you teach some skills and educations to a boy from that village, the boy is likely going to migrate and he's going to perhaps become more prosperous, but the multiplier effect is much lesser. Whereas if you do educate a woman in the same household, the multiplier effects could be more. Now, I don't know how simplistic this idea is and how much merit this idea has. So I would want both of your views on that.
I would try to answer this at different, not answer this, but, offer my opinion at different levels. So let me start with your last sentence. In the human rights discourse, saying that you give a woman an education because it has something, or you avoid a child marriage because it reduces the population, or whatever. Or ban child labor because then children become liabilities on the family. In the human rights discourse, this is called the instrumentalist approach. From where we have to move towards the intrinsic approach. So even if a woman, for example, decides never to have a family, she decides never to marry, she's in same-sex relationship which marriage is not allowed today, or she decides not to teach anybody all her life, or she migrates and has no multiplier effect. Is she some kind of a secondary citizen that unless she performs certain duties even before we give her the access to education, that she has to sign on the dotted line? And so therefore, whatever is good for a man, in the highest quality of education, the highest quality of food, everything, transport, all those are women's rights of transgender people, rights of intersex people, rights of every person in this country. So I would answer that first question in this way. The second is that there is definitely a geographical, the kind of examples that are there from Jharkhand and from Rajasthan, and within that, the kind of empowerment efforts that are going on. The situation might be different in Maharashtra, and in Maharashtra, where, my organization, Masoom, Mahila Sarvangin Utkarsh Mandal works, where we've been doing empowerment work for the past 32 years. And I'll come to that later, because empowerment itself is a double-edged weapon. It's not something, it's a tool. I want to retract my militarist language, so I won't use the word weapon, but I would say a tool, and that's complicated, and I'll come to that later. But the fact is that even if girls get enrolled, and then the enrollment looks very high, there is caste discrimination in schools, there is gender discrimination in schools. So what is who will sweep the courtyard and who will clean the toilets, if there are toilets? Yeah, so it's the Dalit kids who will clean the toilets, and it's the other kids who will, sweep, or who will fill the water in the schools. It's the girls that go out and fill the water. So the moment there is a India-Pakistan match, which are the kids that get stared at? They're the Muslim kids in school. So all the uniforms, we have uniforms. Why? So that somebody doesn't wear fancy clothes and the other. But when you make uniforms, you don't understand the spirit of it, only the letter. There have been kids that I know who have gone to school on alternate days because between two brothers or between two sisters, there's one uniform. How do you learn algebra? How do you learn trigonometry or chemistry if you attend school alternate days? And the right to education is just 6 to 14. It's neither the first grade, pre-first grade, and neither up to the 10th standard. And dropouts don't get counted. So what happens is that you'll find children on the roll, but they may not be there. And then I want to say that, education, transport, nutrition are all connected in people's lives. It's not like 9 to 10 health, 10 to 11 food, then mobility, then transport, right? So if a girl doesn't go to school, within 6 months or 1 year, you can write it down that she will get married. Okay. Because having an, in quotes, unmarried, never married girl at home is much worse than having a girl who has returned from her marital household after domestic violence. Because at least her sexuality is taken care of. At least there is the fact that she's married if she gets pregnant tomorrow. What happens to a never married girl? And so if there is no transport, so I want to I'll do that in the later segment. The privatization of education, the privatization of transport, the privatization of healthcare. Not enough ration shops, what we call the public distribution system in the villages. All these things are linked. And the moment transport gets unsafe, the moment there are no toilets in schools or colleges, the first thing, my friend elopes, my friend gets sexually harassed, I get followed by a boy, I speak to a boy. Any of these can result in immediate curtailment of education. So it's not the right. It's seen as a privilege. If I am a good daughter, and as Shireen said, if I'm a daughter-in-law, of course, at the time of marriage, they may say, we'll educate her. But, after that, I get pregnant, I get involved with my family, I want to put in effort for the relationship with my husband. There's so many things that happen. Why do you want to have an abortion now? You have this child and then, having a child is not like having, like having a manicure, right? You go inside and you have it and you come out and say, okay, I had it. Having a child means being attentive and being responsible for the child throughout. So all these things affect, and then there's a gender element to it. Not that the situation is much better for boys, mind you. Okay, not that the boys in my village have a very good hemoglobin. So they're not 13 or 14%. But for girls, it's even worse. Whether it's education, whether it's transport, whether it's domestic chores, the situation for girls is much worse than that is for boys. And then the tension, because finally these two are not going to lead separate lives. They are going to intersect as father-daughter, as mother-son, as brother-sister, as partners, as classmates. And so therefore all these then play out in every aspect of people's lives.
Just to add, like, you know what Manisha was saying, that I was having a conversation in Rajasthan with one of the boys, and they were saying that a lot of boys, they migrate out and go find work. When they migrate out, and then their marriages are set up back home, and it's set up in such a way that despite what the boy is doing maybe 20 years down the line, and despite what the girl is doing 20 years down the line, they still have to get married to each other because the wedding was set up when they were children. So where their two lives have separately gone off doesn't matter. At the end of the day, they will still come together. So it's very difficult for even the boys to lead that life then.
But let's not say that that is the norm.
No, yes,
that is
yes,
not
absolutely
the norm.
not. Yeah.
I don't want to mislead in that sense. Yes, it may happen in some exceptional cases, but it's not the norm today.
And so basically this means that if we look at any trajectory, be it education and attaining different levels of, learning, seems to be extremely fragile, right? Any one thing can break that chain. So could you tell us how this has sort of changed or evolved over time from, say, a girl or a boy entering class 1 maybe 30 years ago to now? Has there been real progress that we've
Let's just look at the situation now. Maybe well over 90% are enrolled in school.
Right.
But that's not important. We know that they need at least to complete a secondary school education in order to have a fair chance at making a successful transition into adulthood. What happens? Among the 10 to 14s, you see that not all are even reaching class 5. Many are dropping out. If they stay on, as I said earlier, not all are attending on a regular basis. Quality of education is so poor that, at least in Jharkhand, what we saw is, even in terms of literacy, being able to read a small paragraph, only 60-70%. And here both boys and girls were equally disadvantaged. When it comes to maths, boys are considerably better than girls. So being able to do a simple division is much more likely to be, nobody's at 100%, but if boys are at 70, girls may be at 60. We ask questions like, do you know what the capital of the country is? Again, not 100%, it's hardly universal, yet the gender gap is huge. We ask basic practical issues, comparison shopping, calculating the weight of something. There too, girls are terribly disadvantaged. So both in terms of reading and numeracy skills, as well as in terms of general knowledge and practical numeracy, girls are hugely disadvantaged.
And is this because of all that happens outside of school as well? Because so much of our learning, like if the boy just gets more opportunities to just go out and buy things from a store and has to figure out how much change he gets. I mean, that's how we all learn, right? Experientially by living our lives. Is the fact that the lives of most women in that critical age is so constrained that they are just not being given the opportunities to learn from life, all these various smaller skills?
I mean, that may be. Boys have their own peer networks from whom to learn things. Boys, if you ask boys, I mean, girls and boys both have peer networks, and peer networks are really very important for the young. Where do they meet their friends? Girls meet their friends in school, at home.
Nowhere
Boys have a whole new world through which they meet their friends. At the Maidan, in the mall, of course in school and at home. But there's a whole wider world for them. And as you say, yes, so from that wider world, they're learning so many different things. They're exposed to so much more.
And has the introduction of things like cell phones and more accessible internet been changing any of that at any scale?
There too, I think it's very interesting. When you ask young people, do you have a cell phone? You'll see that boys are much more likely, maybe something like 70 and 30%, to say they own their own phone.
Okay.
Girls will say, yes, I can, almost 90% or more of girls will say, yes, I can use the phone at home. But it's somebody else's phone. So when we talk about delivering messaging through IVRS and those kinds of things, we have to be very careful about whether it's really reaching girls. Social media, much more likely to be used by boys. Where do they get their information about sex and those kinds of things? Really much more by boys. And interestingly, when we ask, do you watch pornographic films and so on, boys are always more likely. Married girls also report that they watch, obviously with their husband.
Okay.
But so the media are teaching them things, may not always be accurate.
Of course.
But
to me, the act of trying to consume or interact with that media teaches us so much. I mean, I think none of us, like I had computer science classes in school. I didn't learn how to use a computer because of that class. I learned it because of everything else, right? And so sometimes we feel like school can teach us certain critical things, especially mathematics, language and more. And then we do the rest of our learning outside to complement it. And things like soft skill education might even be a weak substitute for that, right? I mean, it's a good thing to have, but it's not a substitute for you not engaging with the wider world.
I would go back to the way you started the question. The amount of time that the family allows a girl to invest in her homework. So after you drop your school bag, when you come back home, what is a girl expected to do? She's supposed to wash the vessels. She's supposed to start with the cooking. She's supposed to do so many domestic chores, because again, education for her is a privilege. It's not a right. And for the boy, he doesn't have to come into the domestic sphere. He might have to go and fill water, like in my villages which are drought prone. The boy may have to go and get the water on the bicycle in the cans when the tanker comes into the village. But after having done that, he has free space to be in different public domains. And for a girl, therefore, then the education stays. So the hard subjects, like for English and math, we actually call them Rahu Ketu. I mean, these are the two subjects that at the 10th grade, these are just almost impossible for our children to clear, and especially for girls to clear. And as I said, again, education is linked to so many other things of, when she can be withdrawn. So a boy fails a particular grade, he has much more possibility of continuing education versus a girl who fails a particular class. And so therefore she has to work twice as hard with 4 times more difficult situation. Now here let me go to the privatization of education. Okay, so I grew up in the Nehruvian era. I was born in 1956, 9 years after independence. And from my kindergarten class until my PhD viva, which is how many in my village they would say, Tevi Savi Shikliye. So, I mean, that is how they count. 12, 12, 13, 14, 15 is how they count what you have. For my 23 years of education, do you know how much was the entire expense?
How much?
15,000 rupees, 15,000.
Wow.
Of which the government gave me back 10,000 rupees because Nehru's shadow was that we required scientists. And before I came for my PhD in sociology, my master's is microbiology. And because I was doing microbiology by research, I was getting 250 rupees every month to be a scientist in this country. Yeah. And I want to remind young people to know that there was a time in this country when we didn't buy water in bottles. Yeah, we shared it on the train with everybody. Yeah. There was a time when all our elders, all our families got operated in government hospitals or municipal hospitals. There was a time when our educational fees in granted schools were 5 rupees. My fees were 5 rupees. Yeah? And therefore, there was an India like that. So it's not an impossible. And that time, we didn't even have the kind of resources we have today. And so therefore, health, education. Now, let me go to health again. Can you ever imagine any of my family members now, though out of principle, I may go to a government hospital, or health workers or our staff may go to a government hospital. Can you imagine anybody being there in a burns ward or in a labor ward in the government hospitals? Why do we not go there? Because we are told to sign off subsidies for LPG. We are told to sign off subsidies for public distribution system. We are told you don't need to go to government schools. We are told, public transport, is so terrible. Yeah? We are told education is really so bad. So the mayor of Bogota said that a rich country is not where everyone travels by car, but everyone travels by public transport. Yeah? So when I am waiting in the OPD of a government hospital is when the government hospital will deliver the goods. It's when my child goes to a government school is when the standards of that school will get better. Because I will be there as an educated parent. Yeah? Now, if you sign off people from the public distribution system, 450 households, say in one of the villages where I work, every household went for the PDS, and so therefore bringing the ration into the village was lucrative. Now, 15 households are on the PDS list, and so therefore there is no ration shop at all. Yeah? So we have to understand that all access for all people, for all schemes, and for all basic needs is a state obligation. And there are some who require more than that. But nobody can get less than that. So when are the schools going to be such that, my son and my daughter go to the same school as a rural child? Because what happens is that with two different educations and with the aspirations, at one end what Shireen said is where there's just no option to dream. And here in our villages, you ask a 14, 15-year-old girl what she wants to do. Everyone wants to be an IPS officer because they saw some serial in which there is some girl who gets married to a rural boy and she's an IPS. So it's not a havaldar. I'm not saying that the poor must not have big dreams. Yeah, we tell everybody fly high, dream a lot. But IPS people, from the upper middle classes spend 4 years applying for UPSC. And don't get through to that. So what happens is a false equality is created. If I have a backpack, if I have nice shoes, if I have a phone, and again the same gender difference, the boy has a smartphone of his own, the girl might have a basic phone. Yeah? And if I have a laptop, if I get these 4, then I'm at par with the globalized world. But that doesn't happen. My son gets the job. That's the reality. Yeah? And so therefore in this whole neoliberalization with the privatization and, we have to understand that the gap between those who have access and those who don't have access outside the house and those who have access and don't have access inside the house is tremendously increasing. And we can't pit the men inside the house with the women inside the house unless we also talk of the disparities of how both of these are disadvantaged versus people from another household. So I just wanted to do this privatization piece and how it really has put everybody back.
Can I contradict something you said
absolutely.
Much earlier, which was that boys have much more time to do homework at home than girls? In our Jharkhand survey of Dasras, which was across the state, we also asked how much time do you spend doing homework every day? And we were quite surprised that the disparities were relatively narrow. Now, maybe that's because boys are gallivanting and girls are doing housework during that time, but both are spending about as much time doing housework. When we also thought that maybe parents send their daughters to public school and their sons to private school, no, we didn't see any distinction in that. We also thought maybe parents visit their son's school more often because they are more committed to educating their son than their daughter. No, we didn't see much disparity there too. So it seems to me that in many ways, the gender gap in education is narrowing. At the end of the day, if you ask 18 to 19-year-olds, there's not much difference in terms of what percent has completed school. In fact, maybe 1 or 2% more girls than boys have completed school. Of course, a lot of it then is what happens later. As Manisha was saying, after school, what are the real options for girls? That's where we have not paid any attention to that. We talk about skilling missions, and we talk about economic activity, and we talk about demographic dividend. But unless girls are fully engaged in all that, we're not going to reap any of that.
And I also find that this whole skilling conversation feels odd, because if you have not been allowed to learn arithmetic and language and certain things in these formative years, it's really difficult to pick them up later, right? Especially some of these foundational skills and ways of thinking. So no amount of skilling could substitute a quality education per se, right? It could add to it, perhaps.
So I think the way skilling opportunities are geared, there are eligibility criteria.
Okay.
So if you've only had class 5, you probably can't do a call center work.
Okay.
But maybe you can do more a factory type of work. So skilling is very grade relevant. But, it's offering an alternative. Otherwise, you ask girls, what skill do you want to learn? 80% will say tailoring. And why tailoring? Because I can sit at home and maybe I can make a little money. But that's not where you want it to stop.
Right.
You want to encourage going out of the village. You want to have... I met a girl in Bihar who came from quite a remote, difficult to traverse village in Patna district. And she did a course in hospitality.
Okay.
And then she got a job in the Cafe Coffee Day, the local one, and really moved up and became the manager. I said, how do you get to the place? She said, I bought myself a bicycle. So from her village, which takes maybe over an hour, she goes by bicycle. I said, how did you negotiate with your parents? She said the organization, the NGO that she works with, had come and explained to her parents. And then she also said how now she's become a role model. A lot of girls of course everyone wants to do hospitality in that village, but nevertheless, they're all thinking of something.
I've also come across many such stories from in and around Bangalore.
Unfortunately, these stories are all the exceptions.
Yeah.
The rule is something else.
But what you said about when actually an NGO or somebody intervenes, that this is also a possibility. We were able to get 45 girls to stay outside the village for 2 months to do office administration and GST accounting. Or a fellowship program for 35-40 girls at different times, and also some poor Dalit boys. And now those girls are into places where you would never imagine. Fashion designing. Dalit girl is doing fashion designing. I'm not mentioning this obviously I'm saying that her education was going to be stopped not because of anything else, but because the family had seen no other options for their children, and she's learning fashion designing in the city, doing a course like that. So there are unimaginable possibilities that actually can happen, and that small slice, I would take off from what you said, Shireen, that we are finding in some instances that because girls have to be kept out of trouble, and because girls actually do a lot more studies. In many communities now you find that there are more educated girls than there are boys, or girls having a few years of extra, especially business communities. Anyone who might have a small shop or, and there you find that the girls are being educated. And now that is very good. That's also creating a crisis, because in patriarchy, the boy has to be taller, he has to be older, he has to be more educated, and he has to earn more. And now suddenly there is this girl who has studied more than most of the boys in her caste or subcaste or endogamy within which she is going to get married. And so now at one end, why, of course, should this girl compromise and get married to a boy who has never left his village because he studied in the 10th and did farming? On the other hand, what is this farmer boy supposed to do when he is not going to get a bride? And then, of course, as Ambedkar says, caste is endogamy and endogamy is caste. Yeah, so therefore, you can never imagine having an arranged marriage for your children outside the caste, definitely not outside your religion. And so therefore, then, the girls that are being brought into our area, earlier our girls used to go outside because we were the poorer, and they used to go to richer, more irrigated places. Now with land prices soaring, now girls from other districts, the sugarcane cutting districts, are brought into our villages because the alpha male will always find a bride irrespective of what the sex ratio is. Yeah? But the other boys won't find girls in that community. And so therefore girls will be brought from another place. So this is another crisis. I'm not saying necessarily a bad crisis, okay? I'm saying as a rupture or a fracture in the way that we understand patriarchal relationships between men and women. And then families having to negotiate with both these. With a girl going out to study, most times education stops based on the number of kilometers. So if up to this kilometer, 10 girls from this school go to that high school, my daughter can go there. But the moment it's another place, then if everybody is doing arts, then my daughter has to do arts, because the whole village will ask questions. Those girls come back at 6 o'clock. Why does your girl come by the 8 o'clock bus? Not understanding that I might have practicals for which I have to take another. Or if there is a course available close by versus something 200 kilometers away, then just take the course that is there 25 kilometers away from home. So that mobility having increased again is creating a rupture in family dynamics, because now she's meeting girls from other castes. It's not in the private domain. See, when you meet girls only within your home, then which girl can enter your kitchen? Caste and religion make a difference in who can enter your home. But the moment you meet people outside your home, your friend circle increases. The same opportunities boys always have had.
Right.
And so therefore the chances of inter-caste, inter-religious friendships leading to romance, leading to sexuality, leading to marriage increase. And all these are what our communities are grappling with. I would say it's very good. We're living in interesting times. And it's not going to be without ups and downs. But these are what we are finding. And I see this as a very positive development. Because for the first time, people are looking at girls and saying, oh, okay, so she has an opinion. And that opinion is different from what the rest of us think. So for the first time, a girl within a household is being seen also as an individual. So, I think that really is an achievement.
So how, I mean, this is something that I want to understand better. I mean, given our extremely entrenched patriarchal system of society, and even these things all happen in the context of that, right? And there is a power struggle with that. What do you see as the genuine levers of change to start making this patriarchal edifice crumble and become a little more egalitarian and equality focused? Because personally, I'm very skeptical about the state being able to change society, because the state all has actors from the same society. The policeman is from the same society as the person he's trying to enforce laws on. So if the social mores and the norms are however backward they are, where do you see the biggest levers of change coming from?
I think we have to look at it at many levels. As you said, whether you're looking at the health sector, whether you're looking at the police, whether you're looking at the judiciary, we're all from the same society. And so implementing the Child Marriage Act, implementing the PCPNDT Act, and all of those things, we tend to turn a blind eye to. So change is not going to come from that imposition of those laws and so on. I think change comes from the bottom. And so how do we do it? We have seen a lot of change. We've seen, for example, school completion rates have really gone up. And as Manisha was saying, as girls become more exposed to the world around them, change has got to happen.
So that was a change that came from sort of evidence and shared experience, but parents, for example, seeing that, others' children's lives were getting transformed because they stuck to education.
I was just going to get to that. So child marriage has fallen. More girls, very slowly, are having a say in their own life, in who they marry and so on. But I think one group that we have all kind of neglected are parents. And if you see parent-child relations, whether it's in Jharkhand or elsewhere, parent-child relations in this country tend to be very distant. They tend to be very functional. I need money, I want to eat, go and buy this for me, that kind of a relationship. You start asking, did you talk to your child or did you talk to your parent about your friends, your school, what happened in school? Or maybe half of the adolescents, boys actually less than girls, will say yes. But then when you get to more personal things, if you have a boyfriend, girlfriend, if you start menstruating, if you want to know about how pregnancy happens, those things are so rarely communicated between parents and girls and boys. Parents are a hard nut to crack. So as I said earlier, in that study that was done that showed that girls in Andhra were able to go to a call center and really change the profile of girls in their village. That had a lot of communication with parents. I think we need much more attention to parenting. We have a lot of opportunities. We have school management committees, which are meant to have parents in them. We have SH self-help groups, which have a lot of parents. We have our locally elected officials, the PRIs, which are supposed to have both men and women. Those are opportunities through which to change norms about parenting. And I think, of course, one way is when parents will stand up and say, I don't want to marry my child at 16. Or a parent says, I want my daughter to have a career. But I think we need to be able to appease parents' fears. Some of their fears, after all, they're from our same society, about these kind of negative perceptions that everyone has about family izzat and controlling girl sexuality. It's not that you let your child go to college and she's immediately going to have sex with every man that she sees. Girls, you're teaching your child some, and I think so. I feel that parenting skills, both in terms of fostering a closer relationship, plus in terms of looking at your daughter as more than a liability, we have to invest in.
And in the basis, access to education, definitely, like you had fathers, who the legends about how these great men, continued a speech after they heard that their wife died or, the child was ill, and how these are glorified stories. And I cannot imagine a woman, even being on that stage and, even being there at the speech, leave alone continuing. Or fathers saying they didn't even know what class their children were studying in. But today you find even in the communities where we work that fathers are now even ready to sleep outside a school of getting their daughter into a kindergarten. So gender relations are changing. Girls who are going to colleges sometimes say, "Daddy is my best friend." He's the one negotiating with his mother or with his father and saying that his daughter will be educated. She can't talk to him about sanitary napkins. So from the pocket money, she keeps 5 rupees aside every few days and then buys that, unnecessarily expensive sanitary napkin, but she buys that. So she may not talk about certain things, but the relationships are. But they are at more sophisticated functions. It's my daughter needs to go. But it's not about the children's needs because parents are often very instructive. They are the ones who always feel that I know the answer, but I'm going to elaborate on it, even before you ask a question. And that's the reason why, or if you say that, I'm talking to a girl, they're immediately thinking of her, whether she's a good daughter-in-law. He's just friends with her, or probably she's a girlfriend. That doesn't mean that there's going to be a marriage. And about the girl, of course, because the chickens come home to roost. So if boy has sex, he can wander about. Nothing changes. Physically, nothing changes for him. Biologically, nothing changes for him. Life-wise, nothing changes for him. But for a girl, even those 9 months, everything happens. How does she go into a college when she's pregnant? How does she go after she's had the baby? So life changes entirely. And so therefore, at that level, to be able to talk to your boys along with your girls. After that horrible murder, rape happened in Delhi, there were posters put up by the women's movement. Don't teach, me how to dress, teach your son not to rape. Yeah? And I think that is where we need to concentrate on, because the kind of unemployment that we see now, the kind of levels of violence that we see both in media, in the games where, people are killing, more violent games that are coming out, entire society and polity. Earlier people would say, I'll hit you, and that went on for a long time. Now people are kicking them in the ribs. It starts off in 30 seconds, road rage, the beating start. Now this is the context in which a young boy is growing up. With all this toxic masculinity being thrown at him. And at the other end, people are having maybe like one daughter who they are not going to discriminate on the basis of the basic food that they offer. Neither in primary or secondary education. But the difference might come, as I told you, 25 kilometers or 250 kilometers. Who goes where? It will come there. Or if I have 5 lakh of rupees, then will I send my daughter for engineering or medicine or my son? That's where it will come. But for the basic facilities, now there isn't that kind of discrimination on a regular basis that we see at home. Yeah, she is loved, she's cared for in quite sometimes similar ways that boys are. So now we have to address discrimination at different levels. Because discrimination, unless eliminated in every aspect of life, will not go, because one discrimination leads to another discrimination. And so therefore we have to eliminate that. We have to eliminate the fear of violence, just the fear of fear. The fact that something can happen to me. I think we have to reach those levels now.
So in that sense, positive social competition is a thing that can drive a lot of things, right? I mean, there's a similar story from about a century ago from coastal Karnataka about, I think, women joining banks in various positions, and that created a social competition where even in the patriarchal system, if a father could boast that my daughter works in this position there and therefore makes for a better bride, so even however commodified, however poorly, it created a vehicle for more women to be educated and normalize the idea of getting a job, exactly, going out. And a bank job was a good first job to have a century ago, right? You have good timings, you can come home, you can do other things too. And it was like a great gateway job, if you will.
Normalize is the key. When there's enough of girls who are doing these so-called deviant things, marrying later, working, carrying on in college, that's when the norms change in the entire village. But just getting back to parents, I think, and the whole concept of violence, we know that witnessing parental violence is one of the strongest indicators of both perpetrating it as adults and submitting to it as a girl. And this is something that we have to be able to demonstrate to parents. The ill effects of this kind of violence on their child's future. And
because some of the worst behaviors get picked up at home. Right?
Exactly, yes.
And so in all this, given that this is fundamentally a societal problem, right, with parents and how we work in society, what do you think are the unique roles that the state can play in this to actually make a difference when it comes to education or anything else?
I think India is full of really well-written policies and programs, and implementation is where we crack up. For example, we now have the RKSK program for adolescent health. It has dedicated facilities that are meant to be for adolescents with a counselor and so on. They also have school-based activities. They have community-based activities. They recognize that girls are secluded, need a safe space, and so they create groups through which girls are brought together and, can develop their peer networks and, at the same time, learn about gender and so on. And so can boys, because there's the equivalent for boys. But implementation is the big issue. And I think that's one program. But you see on many levels, in the health arena, in the skilling arena, in the education, everything exists on paper, but implementation and the commitment to seeing that program work, I think, is where we're failing.
And, this is very true. Finally, it all operates, like you were asking the question earlier, it all operates within the socio-economic and other context, right? So you have the Prevention of Sexual Harassment at Workplace Act, which came out of, the heroism of, Bhavri Devi. I mean, we don't name women who are raped, but Bhavri Devi is an icon, and she herself has come out and, and she lost her case right up to every court. But we got the Bishaka guidelines, and from there we got the POSH Act. So for the first response of many people, don't hire girls. Yeah, that's the patriarchal response. Yeah? The PCPNDT, the prenatal diagnostic techniques misuse or the preconception. I was part of the campaign in Maharashtra. I was part of the Maharashtra expert committee. I was part of the Delhi expert committee when we got the acts. And then from 1994 until 2000, not a single doctor was even booked, leave alone convicted. And so Sehat Mamasum, my organization Sehat, to which also I was connected, Dr. Sabu George, we went and filed a writ petition, and the PNDT also included the preconception. Now, the feminist movement that actually pioneered this act clearly only spoke about the discrimination and sex determination techniques. But when this became a more popular activity, it became anti-abortion. Yeah? And today women's access to abortion, one of the reasons given by the doctors is that obviously because 50% of the fetuses would be female fetuses. Yeah? So therefore, again, it operates within that. But you are ready to pay 10 times the price, some doctors might still give you the sex determination. The POXO, prevention of, sexual offenses against children, extremely well, required. Acts within patriarchy. What happens? Girls or even boys get sexually abused. We know that boys get sexually abused too. But very rarely is rape spoken about. When boys get raped anally or orally, that's not considered real rape. For girls also, the penovaginal rape is the real rape because that's where only the seed of the future husband is supposed to go in, because in the patriarchal world, that is what her uterus is for, right? So, at that point, very rarely does it get spoken about, because then the prospects of marriage reduce. But what does POCSO get maximally used for? It's when girls elope. That's when parents file POCSO and file kidnapping. So the girl might be 17, the boy might also be 17. So proximity of age never gets considered. That they are both 17. It's not like she's 17 and he's 28. Yeah? But the boy can go inside on POCSO and as kidnapping. Yeah? So all these, even if she's 19, of course, when they run away, and a lot of runaway couples come to us as well. When they run away, they hardly run away with their birth certificates or with their, school leaving certificates. And so therefore, even if a 19-year-old girl runs away, the parents would say she's 17. The state, considering that she is the property of the family, give her back to the family. And then, of course, everyone threatens to commit suicide, homicide, whatever. Doesn't talk to her emotionally, completely isolates her, which is considered normal in society, that her mobile is taken away, that she's locked up, that nobody talks to her, because nobody in the community wants to have this kind of a role model where a family allowed the daughter to elope. So it's in everyone's interest that the family punishes her, so that it doesn't happen to my daughter tomorrow. And my daughter gets a lesson just by watching. So she is taken back. When she's brought back to court, obviously she says that no. And what is the only thing that she can say in patriarchy? He raped me. Because in sexuality, to have been raped is considered marginally better than to say I consented in sexuality. There I'm even a much worse bad woman if I consented in sexuality. So finally, all these things do come down to patriarchy. And what is patriarchy? It's the passage of property through the male seed. That is patriarchy, right? And if that is what you have to do, then it's automatic that you have to control women's mobility, their decision making, not give them property or inheritance. If you gave your daughter inheritance, how many daughters would want to marry? We are actually finding, Shireen, we are actually finding in the middle classes, a lot of young girls that I'm speaking to in Bombay or Pune, more boys are inclined towards marriage than girls are inclined towards marriage. Girls say, I might have a boyfriend, I might go into a live-in relationship, I might live in my own house, meet him when I want. But who wants to get into marriage? Because I think probably boys gain more through the institution of marriage than girls do. And so all these are, in my mind, very exciting happenings. A lot of people will pay a lot of price. But then what good comes without paying a price, right? So I think these things are all happening. The good is happening, the bad is happening, the ugly is happening. And so, again, I would say the question you asked and also what Shireen said, that we cannot expect a law to make the ultimate change in people's lives. It is the people themselves. And that is also what democracy is about, right? That you work with the people, that you strengthen people. So the pressure is from bottom up and not from top to bottom. And if we change people's mindsets through more positive role models than through punitive action, I think that probably is going to change the family.
Opportunities. I think those kinds of ways are much more important
Absolutely.
at the ground level than the law or...
And going back to the idea of state and implementation capacity, sometimes I feel like maybe if the Indian governments, I mean state and central, actually are a little less ambitious, but can actually follow through on that limited ambition, maybe we can see more, right? I mean, at last count, there were a few hundred centrally sponsored schemes, and when they wanted to reduce them, they just made them A, B, C, D, E, F of one scheme and then dumped it all in. So the Indian state, its ambitions are endless, right? Coming from the constitution and coming from the best of places. And its follow-through ability is disastrously weak, right? I mean, if there was no POSCO, but if there was some other, whatever existing laws, they could just enforce that better, right? And I feel like the more that you get laws that are in conflict with the norms, the less respect there is for the law, right? I mean, if people believe in the moral authority of a cup, as opposed to the Constitution of India, then we have a serious problem on our hands, because the moral authority stays at other places, and we are not. I feel like we are always putting the cart before the horse. I think a lot of well-meaning people want to get a legislation in place before social action, and trying to persuade people's minds.
Even if those tasked with implementing those laws really were committed to it, there are ways. I've seen work done by some NGOs on the Child Marriage Act. So they use the law in creative ways, not to send the guy to jail or the father to jail or to court, but rather to explain to him, to threaten, to make the environment such that he would fear doing it. And in that way, use the law in a much more creative and less punitive way.
To achieve the desired outcome.
To achieve the desired outcome. I think we have to have more of that, but that's only if the lawmakers are committed.
I mean, people in the military talk about the spirit of the corps, right? I mean, but that's essentially what it is. I mean, if you're a teacher in a government school or anywhere else, you believing in your mission makes so much of a difference, irrespective of how much talent there might be as a teacher or as anything else. And I fully agree that things are working in the government because a minority of people at least believe this right now, right? Even if that minority didn't exist, then we don't know how much worse things would be.
Richa, I think, wants to come in to say something also. Yes. I would just, take off from this conversation. What the implementation at the village level happens in vertical silos. And so therefore, if you say that, in drought, for example, my community, because there's drought and the buses, there's no money to even survive. So then what do? How do you get that 900 rupee pass for your daughter to travel? So that's the first thing that gets off the budget. So then the government said that all children can go to college they can go free. Now, but that is not communicated to the transport department. So the buses, STs run on the most profitable routes. And wherever there are maximum passes, that's where the buses are the least. Or when the bus comes, when they go to the college, 3 lectures have already happened. And when the last bus leaves, there are already 2 that have to take place. So there is just no convergence. And I think that, even in the implementation, whether it's nutrition, whether it's health, you can't have a bus come into a PHC village, the primary health center, when it's closing, and you can't have the last bus leave when it's opening. Yeah? So very simple things like that. Now, basic dignity and respect, that's human rights. Senior citizens having discount. In the buses, if the senior citizen gets ridiculed and says, this old man or this old woman has nothing to do and just travels because she has, So, I mean, the basic respect for people, and not to work in vertical silos, but to converge. So one department, even within each department, they're not talking to each other. And what we expect is wholesome, robust way of looking at people's lives, where all departments are talking to each other at every level. So if a woman is looking at children 0 to 6, that's the best time to look at school enrollment, to look at nutrition, to talk to mothers about domestic violence, to talk about so many different things. And I think that that's what, without burdening the female health workers, because they're already overburdened. But I'm just saying that, having convergent talks at the village level.
Yeah. No, so I was just saying that just in terms of creative ideas and, coming from ground up, the whole Ab Meri Baari campaign. So these girls have put together a charter of recommendation. They are not going anywhere out of line. What they've done is they've assessed the delivery of government schemes. They are saying that we are not getting right information. The village level child protection committee is not working. Give us active roles in these things. So, putting the adolescents at the center and the focus of all the programs, of all the policies, giving them empowerment, giving them awareness is going to really help. They have done a beautiful work. They've creatively used a charter of recommendation to go and talk to the government to say, hey, we're not getting these services and this is very critical for our growth. So, giving them the lead as well will be really helpful for their own development.
I mean, that's what I really, really love about the campaign, and I'm looking forward to at least sharing some clips of conversations and things that the girl champions have said, in addition to our discussion here in studio. Thank you so much for coming on the Pragati podcast today. It was an absolute pleasure to have you all here.
Thank you.
Thank you
It was
so
a
much,
pleasure.
Pavan.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for staying with us till the end. If you have any questions or comments, do write in to podcast@thinkpragati.com. And hey, if you like the podcast and listen to us on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and a review. It'll mean a lot to us. The Pragati podcast is available on the IVM podcast app and pretty much every other podcast app and platform. We are there everywhere.
How aware do you think you are of your laws and rights? Do you look up to laws when you are caught up in situations? Do you know what your rights are when you're stuck somewhere bad? Well, here's a show that can help you move an inch closer to being aware of what your rights are. Tune into Know Your Qanoon with me, Amber Rana. This is a podcast meant to answer all your law-related queries. Catch Know Your Qanoon every week on the IVM website or the app or anywhere you get your podcast from.
नमस्ते, मैं हूँ सौरभ चंद्रा
और मैं प्रणय कुटस्थाने।
जब महफिल खत्म होते होते दरवाजे के बाहर पुलिया के ऊपर हम दुनिया भर की जटिल समस्याओं को सॉल्व करने में लग जाते हैं तो हो जाती है पुलियाबाजी।
अब आजकल के अपार्टमेंट वालों ने तो कभी पुलिया देखी नहीं होगी, पर आप फीलिंग तो समझ ही सकते हैं।
तो आइए शामिल हो जाइए हमारी पुलियाबाजी में, जहाँ प्रणय और मैं एक से एक इंटरेस्टिंग टॉपिक्स की तह तक जाएंगे।
आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस, बिटकॉइन, पाकिस्तान, मेडिकल एजुकेशन, करेंसी क्राइसिस, कभी हम दोनों के साथ और अक्सर स्पेशल एक्सपर्ट गेस्ट की कंपनी में।
सुनिए हमें IVM की वेबसाइट, ऐप या अपने फेवरेट पॉडकास्टिंग प्लेटफॉर्म पर हर दूसरे हफ्ते।